there's this invisibility when it comes to the clairaudience, and that makes it very difficult to work our way out of if we can't even grasp. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to Going Dotty. I'm Tracy again, and in today's video we're going to be looking at claircognizance and clairaudience as the two masculine elements of our energetic system and structure. So let's crack into it. So the next two intuitives that we're going to be looking at, they're both masculine in their structure insofar as they rely on data, information, structure is important to them. It's how they feel, it's the experience that we have when we're with them, and it's very much a counterbalance or the opposite to the feminine sort of motions. So the claircognizance is clear knowing, and in this clear knowing, it's very binary in its structure. It's very yes or no, here or there, this or that. Claircognizance and knowing comes from our sense of smell. So I suppose back in the day when we were more primitive, you would have picked up a handful of berries that you hadn't come across before. And, you know, our ancestors really would have been relying on their sense of smell alone to decipher whether these berries were potentially safe to eat or not safe to eat. And so in this motion, it's very much a yes or a no. There's no 50-50 answer. You either eat the berries and don't make it, or you eat the berries and they're fine. And we mightn't use this sense of smell as much in the world nowadays, but our sense of smell is also one of our oldest systems. It's connected into the reptilian brain, and it's very strong. And I think that we can see this a lot manifesting within the world when somebody has an opinion and they're either very yes or very no, that sense of strength, because it's coming from their claircognizance, which I often think of it like a shield that people wear, their knowledge. And when we align our claircognizance and our knowing with what we think, what we believe, what we allow through our vehicle, we can start to see in a little bit of a more integrated manner how our energetic system operates, is formed, and really works. Because it is very binary, it's also very dualistic. There's very much two sides to emotion. In being very binary, the claircognizant individual, also operates and can operate from a great place of judgment. This can be judgment because they have a thought, an ideal, or a belief about something. And it can also be judgment because they feel like they have predefined a situation. They judge a certain sort of person as all being the same. And therefore, claircognizance can really not actually take into account the varied, textured layers and levels of information and data that can be contained within something. So when you have an ego who is operating through their claircognizant, first of all, they can be very authoritative. They can really be strong in their energy field. They can be really solid in their energetic suit. They can seem very confident in what they know, their knowledge, what they know and what they don't know, what's true and what's not true. They can often have like a vast array of information. And because they carry and conduct themselves in such a way, we can often, feel like they are right and correct. Again, what we want to bear in mind when we're actually interacting with other people energetically is that if somebody is very strong on a topic, and they're embodying their claircognizance, and if we are not as strong in that topic, then we feel their force field and we can find ourselves just leaning in to believe them because of how they carry themselves, which is not necessarily an indication of accuracy or truth. The claircognizant person can be very closed and therefore very difficult to speak to. It's like trying to get through a wall. If they have a thought about something, or if they have, to their perception, knowledge about something, or if they feel vindicated in a judgment about something, you're not really going to change their mind. They're very solid, there's a wall, they're very grounded in that, and they really hold on to that. Their beliefs are so important to them. And within this, we find that it can be a sense of the claircognizant person either shines their light and shares, or they withhold their light. So you either feel like you're with them and they're there in the field with you, or like you've done something bad, wrong. This vindication can come from a claircognizant individual because of how they are holding themselves within their energy system. We also find like they act like either they know everything or they know things in advance. So they can be very predetermined. This is interrelated, I feel, to the judgment of things. They already know. They already have some exalted, sense, some intuition of awareness. And the claircognitive egoic individual, does not want to be found to be wrong or lacking in that knowledge or awareness. These people can really trigger us into conflict because they're very binary. If you are interacting with somebody who is very binary, you will either be in agreement because you're on the same page, or you'll be opposing. There's this real, polarity that comes from this binary operational system. And that's often why this transition from, one way of living, an egoic way of living, to a consciously awake and aware individual, it's often referred to as moving from duality to triality. Duality meaning stemming from a conscious construct that is binary in its motion, and triality is where there is another layer that is not existent within duality. So these are often just some of the terms that are used, and just trying to make you familiar with those. The next intuitive system, also masculine in its structure, is clairaudience. Clairaudience meaning clear hearing. CLAIR means clear. And your audience is to do with your auditory functions, so clear hearing. Now, this one can really give some people the willies, and it makes them very uncomfortable. But your clairaudience will be the aspect and element of your energetic system that correlates and corresponds to your thoughts. So I often think of the mind as being like a room where you have your ceiling, you have your floor, you have the walls of your perception. Perhaps you've come across the concept before of the mansion of the mind, and the mind as being a mansion with many rooms. When we're working through the mental body healing series, and we are going to use this metaphor just as a way to explain the multifaceted places and spaces within the psyche, and give ourselves the tools that we need to be able to navigate through the psyche. So if we run with this metaphor of the mind as being like a room and it has the ceiling, our clairaudience can be like the skyline. It can be like the sky, that which is going on above and beyond that which we necessarily either perceive or notice when we're, grounded in our form. Thoughts to my mind are really interesting, the fact that they work, how they operate. They are electrochemical systems that are fired throughout our brain, that is translated through some magical way, auditorially, through thoughts, So much when we're working with clairaudience, we're working with the real nitty-gritty of the mental body system and the mental mechanics. And when it comes to the negative ego within your clairaudience, what this always makes me think of is the archetype of a school teacher. So I just want you to take a moment to imagine a primary school teacher. That's somebody who teaches people 7, 8, 9, 10, who's really strict, And in the classroom, there's knowledge, information, data, and the student is meant to be, learning, clicking into, understanding this information. And perhaps maybe this is more of an old-fashioned teacher, and I might be showing my age here a little bit, but back in the day, when if you weren't understanding something and the teacher would just look at you and they give you these really strong eyes because you weren't getting it or you weren't doing it right. But this inner experience of that, when you're meant to be grasping something is meant to be accessible to you and you can't quite reach it. And you have this space that is not being fulfilled because you're not clicking into it, but you can't quite articulate that space. So if we consider the kind of negative, not so great, traumatic kind of experiences that can happen to the intellectual system and structure of a person who maybe had a hard teacher or who mightn't have been a great teacher, but that's not really the point. It's that archetype of a strict primary school teacher who doesn't communicate, isn't tuning in or tuning you into what needs to be, and yet it's that space. It's that kind of cavern above the mind. It's, the ceiling within the cathedral of the mind. And this is why our clairaudience is very uncomfortable for a lot of people to think about this space. It's very hard to access. It's not like we get a nice, neat list of all our thoughts and how they're all interconnected. And this clairaudient platform within ourselves can be very disconnected, you know. And this is why we go through the mental healing, the holding our fragmented conscious system. Because a lot of this comes from our conditioning, the thoughts that we have accepted in our clairaudient element and place of self. And what's really difficult here when we're talking about clairaudience is it's really hard to grasp a concept of, you know, like the clairvoyant allows us to have this sense of perception, being able to see things. But when it comes to being clairaudient, there's no way to, you know, grasp or hold a thought. We can't pull them on demand if they are shrouded or in negativity because, you know, we had to take on low vibration thoughts, or if we were forced into like a traumatic or a negative mental body experience, for example, the likes of school. That will be more relevant to some people than others, and I know that. I'm trying to talk about what's quite generally a difficult thing to define, to describe and talk about. But when we're talking about an ego who is coming from their sense of clairaudience, how this will really manifest for us is in their sense of control. You know, control a lot of the time it's this subtle insinuation or suggestion that you're meant to be doing something different than what you are. But again, what happens a lot is we're not actually being given the natural tools. It's not like we're being told or communicated with properly or fully. There's just this assumption that we're going to fill the expectation of the person who's controlling. And obviously, depending on how the control occurs, we may or may not know that. But when the ego is coming from a sense of clairaudience, there can be this real auditory constriction, you know, and there's a lack of the light to illuminate what you're meant to be doing or how things are meant to be. Not necessarily that if you're interacting with an ego that you should be doing what they say anyways. That's not really the point of the angle of that. But I'm rather trying to suggest when there's this assumption and there's this narrow bandwidth of possibility, this is some of the ways that we experience clairaudience. And I think, you know, when it comes to children and childhood and learning, you know, especially if there are people who, and a lot of people really that I generally tend to come across, people who feel like they are somehow depleted or deficient because they weren't very good in school or smart in school. And, you know, I often wonder how much this was the bad training that they received or lack of training because things weren't said in the right way. And yet we can really be left with these beliefs deeply entrenched within our system. And it's very difficult to find, you know, these beliefs because unlike a clairvoyant experience or a clairsentient experience, which we have more of a grasp of, or even a claircognizant experience, we can kind of remember, well, I was told this specifically, and that's what I made from it, and that's why that occurred. You know, there's this invisibility when it comes to the clairaudience, and that makes it very difficult to work our way out of if we can't even grasp the very basis and the very simple tenet of that which we are doing. So that's just to open really the concept of our clairaudience and how it operates through the ego. And we will of course go through this in more detail in the intuitive series, and I really do think that clairaudience will be a big one to focus on. It's difficult to talk about from my perspective for sure. These often seem like strange concepts depending on where you are in the world, I suppose, and where you're at within yourself within the world really. But it becomes really important because your clairaudience is where an awful lot of your invisible conditioning will be held. And it has an awful lot to do with our conscious structure and how our conscious structure is pumped with information, you know, as we are coming up within the world through life from childhood and things like that. So we will deal with that more fully at an appropriate time, but just to highlight it at this point. So that's today's video, looking at the two masculine elements of the intuitive self within the, you know, ego manifesting through intuition. These few videos covering this off. The next video we're going to look at the final one, which is Clairgustance. So I hope you join me for that. Look after yourselves and I'll talk to you guys again.